Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. Time to mow the lawns, apparently. I guess that's going to be going on outside the windows of KITM World Headquarters, at least for a little while today. I don't know if there's any leaf blowing scheduled for today, but, well, I don't know. I guess we'll all find out that, and of course the angry birds that sometimes live outside the studio window as well. Got some commentary on the homey sounds of the breakfast nook that we keep inside the studio as well. Heartwarming to some, so that's good. There's not much I can do to disrupt that, especially on Mondays and Fridays. Okay, here come the lawnmowers. A little bit closer. They must be right behind. Okay, this will be fun. Anyway, lots to do, lots to catch up on today. As a matter of fact, as I said in the Morning Post, we'll be Joanless today. One of the Joanless Tuesdays here on the Kagro in the Morning Show. As you may know, she has like actual job responsibilities elsewhere besides just, hanging out with us and entertaining us, which is fantastic that she'll give us that time anyway. But it's, I guess, the expected SCOTUS dump day. I don't know whether that means that they'll actually start handing down these cases. I guess the ones that we spoke about yesterday that were breaking news while we were on the air yesterday are just early arrivals. I don't really know how it was that everybody said, well, starting Tuesday, they'll really do these things. And then on Monday, there were some, I don't know what the procedure was on that one and why Monday rather than Tuesday. But Tuesday is the day that they now expect this, which means, in our case, Joan will be disrupting her life to be on standby. Because as you know, in major media organizations, what you do is you stand around outside the court and you wait for the decisions to be handed down, and then you get handed 50-page documents, and then you're supposed to digest it and spit out what happened on the air. And the news networks are really good at that. Daily Kos should probably send Joan to stand outside of the Supreme Court and wait around and then listen to CNN read the decision and analyze the decision live on the air and then just jump in and say, you're wrong, you did it wrong, you got it all wrong, let me tell you what's going on here. I mean, that would be entertaining. And we should put that, there should be a video provided of that for the Daily Kos audience. Well, that's not exactly what she's doing, but the day does mean that she'll be on standby waiting for, the biggest news since forever to break. I, on the other hand, am hoping for a boring day and a boring week so that, meaning that there are no bombshells from the Supreme Court. I can't tell whether the last couple of seemingly decent decisions are indicative of some new trend or I guess how much work do they think they have yet to do to rehabilitate the reputation of the Supreme Court? Do they think they're done? Have they had in mind some crazy bombshell that they're going to go completely, off the page on independent state legislature theory? And so to sort of set that up, if they had been, ruling from an authoritarian lunatic standpoint over the past couple of weeks, this would be the last straw? Or are they trying to set us up for some major bombshell by throwing us a few bones along the way? Or am I overthinking it? I don't know. I'm not sure how much work they have left to do. I'll say this. I'm pretty sure that the conservatives on the court have not turned liberal by any means. So they're up to something in finding that logic will prevail and the outcomes of the cases are being decided as they ought to be by thinking legal analysts who value precedent and seek to avoid major social disruption by fiat from the SCOTUS. Now, whether or not that lasts or whether or not that was just a setup remains to be seen. But I know this. Whenever people say, well, as soon as Tuesday, these things could happen, and then you disrupt your life and you reschedule things so that you're available all day Tuesday, they will release those things later in the week and you'll have wasted your Tuesday. It's like having a Supreme Court full of cable TV repairmen. We'll be releasing all of the hot cases sometime between 9 and 12 today. And you sit around waiting. And of course, they don't even offer you the 1 to 4 window, but you cancel all your appointments and stay home for the day. And you're lucky if they even show during the 1 to 4 window. You get the idea. We'll see whether that holds true or whether the court simply cannot help itself and can't wait to start dropping the major cases ASAP. But then if that were the case, they would have dropped them before when people weren't waiting around. It would have been such a exciting surprise to dump them out and to not have the reporters around waiting to pounce on them. Although I guess they love the attention. Maybe that's why they do it this way. Okay. Let's see. Other things they're happening. As it turns out, people keep doing things and whatever. And lots of interesting stories today, commentary, new news breaking, etc., etc. Let's get through it all. First, I guess we should have begun right away with John Shiflett's announcement that we were, in fact, live and on the air. I mean, this serves just as well as John's announcement, but there it is. The Kagro in the Morning Show live here at about 9:01-ish a.m. Eastern Time, as he likes to put it, because that's about right. It is, and he likes to check the calendar, too. He must have one of those NAFTA calendars that has all these dates on it. It is micro, small, small, and medium-sized enterprises day. So everything but big enterprises. What? How come there's no big enterprises day? And the answer, of course, kids in the back seat, no. Every day is big enterprises day. So there you have it. Okay, excellent. Micro enterprise. I don't know. Everything's we've got new terms for everything. Well, I'm not certain what makes something a micro enterprise versus a small enterprise, but I guess a pop-up store is a micro enterprise. A Etsy shop is a micro enterprise. A small enterprise might be someplace with a storefront. I don't know. And then if you have 2 locations, you're a medium-sized enterprise. I don't really know what the definition is. A lot of micro things going on these days. Our college boy, who's no longer a college boy because he graduated, having taken his degree by force, if necessary, in economics. I have this news. I can tell you he's a published author now. So anybody who needs their economist slots filled with brand new shiny jobs, you can come and let me know. But he's just published a paper on microtransactions in video games. Apparently he's found himself a hot little niche there in, I guess, for all I know, I mean, as far as I understand it, monetization of free-to-play video games. It's the hottest trend in the sense that the gaming companies can't wait to get a piece of it and the gamers can't stand it. But at any rate, well, that's economics for you. But I guess that's how you monetize one of the favored models for monetizing free-to-play video games is, well, there's now a whole job sector of game economist. You're essentially responsible for designing, constructing, overseeing, maintaining an in-game economy where players can buy, in most cases, in terms of monetization of the game, buy items for sale, for use in the game from the company store, essentially. Some of the more advanced, massive multiplayer games have marketplaces where you can also sell your things that you don't want anymore, or you can sell player, user-generated content. Make your own special items and sell them. And at any rate, he did an interesting analysis of microtransactions in video games and the optimal, from the company perspective, because he's an economist after all. Not that you couldn't be taking the individual perspective. Perhaps we should have encouraged that. But if you're looking for a job, I guess the better approach is how can companies offer the best deals of the most that are of the most interest to your users, and I assume maximize profit along the way because, like I said, he's an economist. So, interesting topic, and has it published in the Journal of Undergraduate Research from his graduating institution, and so that's real cool, and that's nice. You get to put that on the resume and circulate that. The issue now is getting him to put that on the resume and circulate it. So anyway, that's good news. I thought I would share that. There's bad news. Donald Trump is guilty of espionage and needs to be arrested and put through the ringer. As the little bunny guy with the sign on social media often says, it's not me saying it, he's calling for the arrest, trial, conviction, and execution of Donald J. Trump. And you might as well get down to it, too, because CNN has got the tapes. I guess they got a hold of the actual tape that's been mentioned so many times of him at, where is he, Bedminster, and discussing the plan that he was given by General Milley, without getting into the background of the plan, but the plan of possible attack, if necessary, on Iran that was highly classified, that he has stolen from the United States government and keeps with him, not only in Pervalago, his pervert nest, and it's important to remind everybody that that's exactly what it is, because that comes up later, and waving it around and showing it to people, and as he has brought it with him to Bedminster. By the way, the tape is, I guess it's important to hear, and I suppose we could play it. I don't think though CNN is claiming it as an exclusive, and I'm sure it is, I don't think that they have any copyright interest necessarily in the tape. It's an interesting question, but not one for us to examine here. We can break it up a little bit, but to the extent that anybody thought that what's-her-face, the young woman who is there and taking part in the conversation in an effort to help Mark Meadows write his book. I forget what her name is. Her name is alliterative and stupid sounding as well. And at any rate, to the extent that anybody thought that she was any kind of helpful person or standing up for what was right or a hero of any kind in any of this, because, I don't know. For instance, in the transcript of the tape, Trump is discussing that he shouldn't be showing this to anybody because, well, here's the transcript. See, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is still a secret. And then there's a response of, now we have a problem. And then Trump, interestingly enough, says, isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's interesting. You should be in the clink for it for 20, 30, 50 years. Other people have been executed for things like this, but right. Anyway, in case you thought she was seriously stating, now we have a problem, when you hear the tape, you'll hear that this is laughter and chuckling. It may be nervous laughter, or a little bit like, I swear to God, I think Putin pays Trump. Ha ha, let's keep it a secret. That's how you know we're family. Ha ha ha. He was just joking. This is no joke, obviously. And again, I'll also reiterate by way of background on this material that everybody knows that the military produces these things all the time as contingency plans, and very frequently at the request of the administration. But sometimes no specific request is made. These are just plans that they make. Now, why? It's funny because Trump spends the whole tape saying, he gave me this. This is him. This is him. He's very poorly spoken, of course, but he gave this to me. He gave this to me. He gave this to me. Why did he give it to you? The Pentagon has a ton of papers on how to invade everybody. Why did he give you this one? And the answer is probably because you asked for that. I mean, he didn't give you the plan for invading Thailand because you didn't ask for that, because invading Iran is the one that's on your mind. That's how it got to your desk. You expressed an interest in it. And you were supposedly the president of the United States, so you're entitled to it, so they gave it to you. But the whole thing is accusatory. He gave this to me. He gave this to me. The insinuation being, Milley wanted us to attack Iran. Not me. But of course, as you know, every Republican accusation is a confession. That's right. Okay, so where is, let me scroll back up. Here's the little text box here. Hear the conversation. Listen to the audio exclusively obtained by CNN. We'll credit them with that. Of this conversation. It's happening in July of 2021. It is 2 years old. 2 years ago, he committed this treason, and we've just been hoping to learn of or find evidence of it all this time. And he's been walking around free this whole time, and this is what he was doing. Let's hear a little bit of it, a little at a time, perhaps.
These are bad, sick people.
Ooh.
That was your...
There's another one, right? Speaking of every Republican accusation being a confession, holy mackerel, this guy is sick in the head. We all know that by now. But all right, let's roll it again. Oh, let's not roll it, right? Let's just have technical difficulties. Try again. All right. Maybe I'll reload the page. How about that? See if that helps us any. I don't know. I didn't like being stopped, so we'll see how this goes from now on.
These are bad, sick people.
That was your coup, against you.
It started right at the
beginning.
beginning.
When Millie's talking about, you were going to try to do a coup. No, they were trying to do that before you even were sworn in.
That's right.
Trying to overthrow your election.
Well, with Millie, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran.
Well, there's the rustling of the paper. I didn't have a paper, or the paper I had was some different paper. No. But you hear him giving a lot of context. Let me see that. And then, of course, let me show this to you. What would be the point of showing her paper that wasn't the paper you were speaking about? Unless it was, I was trying to fool investigators for some reason. Okay, interesting enough. But were you in possession of the paper? You were. Were you entitled to be in possession of the paper? You were not. No. How? That's really interesting. But I didn't show it to her. Well, okay. It would have been a separate count. But these two should put you away for 20 years apiece.
Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look.
That's another. I love that part. Isn't that amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This one paper that I wanted to show you just came up. I didn't produce it to show to you. This was just happenstance. If I had gone to get it, you see, that would be espionage. But if it just happens to be here, my mistake, you're not cleared to see this classified material. Neither am I. I'm not even allowed to possess it. But if you just happen to see it, come on.
This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this.
And this is off the record, by the way. And that doesn't usually work either, to just start confessing to a crime. So this is off the record, by the way. That has to be arranged ahead of time. But she's an obsequious, brown noser, I'm sure. So she might consider that off the record. This is him. He presented me this. This is him. But this is off the record, but this is him. He says it a couple more times.
This was the Defense Department and him. Wow. We looked at him.
Wow.
This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him.
This wasn't done by me. You can bet your ass it wasn't done by him. His would have had like a big arrow. Bring nukes here. Now, there's no question but that this plan wasn't him. The only question is, why does it end up in his hands? And the answer is, he asked for it. Otherwise, where does the Pentagon usually keep its secret plans for invading countries? Probably somewhere else, right? Not just, here, President, have a plan. Today, it was not as interesting as yesterday. Yesterday was Iran. I know you were personally interested in that one. Today, we had plans for invading Mozambique. No, I'm not actually interested in that. Don't show it to me. All right, where should we keep it? How about the Pentagon? I'm sure you have some sort of place in the Pentagon. Maybe a computer, maybe a file, whatever it is. But it's not my desk, right? I got enough on my desk. That one I want. Mozambique, you can keep. I just big giant pile of papers. Just shut up. Look at this. No, wait a minute. Don't look at this because it's classified.
All sorts of stuff. It's pages long. Look.
Yeah, it's thorough. He's amazed by that. Yeah. I can't believe it. They have so many plans. It's like, look, just attack Iran. One page. Okay.
Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing?
Listen to the laughter, too.
This totally wins my case,
Oh, yeah, totally.
Except it is like highly confidential, secret.
Espionage. Totally secret. Should have executed me.
Would print that out all the time,
Oh, by the way, you hear that one? Hold on a second.
You attack.
So yeah, this is totally classified. It's terrible. I really shouldn't be showing you this. Did you hear what she said?
And
Hillary would print that out all the time, you know.
Oh.
she'd send
Private
it,
email.
she'd send it to
Yeah.
Anthony Weiner,
Yeah.
the pervert.
The pervert. It's the pervert himself. The pervert in chief. The guy who let Jeffrey Epstein troll the pool deck for underage teenage girls who were working here as towel girls. Interesting thing. I don't like to let my guests get their own towels. I like to have them served towels by young teenage girls. Because it makes the towel more absorbent. I don't know if you know that. It's just scientific. There's nothing sexual about it at all. If that happens, it's entirely up to them. I'm just saying that there's 15-year-old girls handing out towels to naked, wet billionaires hanging out at my pool. Whatever happens after that is up to you. And I just make sure that the teenage girls are interesting. I take a look at them while they're changing in the changing room. And if they're interesting enough, I keep them here to give towels to the old men who come swimming here. And Anthony Weiner, what a pervert. Pervert city, if you ask me.
By the way, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
I was
incredible.
just saying, because we were talking about
You
it.
perverted old
And he
bastard.
said he wanted to attack Iran and what?
You
These are the
did.
papers.
It's pretty
This was done by the military, given to me.
I mean, totally willful misunderstanding of the document they're listening to, or looking at. Listening to, too, as well, as they're rattling it around.
I think we can probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
Declassify.
figure out
it.
yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified
Yeah.
it. Now I can't, but this is
Yeah,
classified.
now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
Now we have a problem. Espionage. Yeah, now you effing do have a problem, by the way. And this just makes you look like you're in on the crime. So I don't know how they got a hold of the tape, but they did. And I would have to say the fact that it's in their hands now means, well, somebody's in a world of trouble. I wonder if they offered her immunity in order to turn over the tape, because she don't sound so good on that tape, to be honest.
It's so cool. I mean, it's so
cool.
Here and I have, and you probably almost didn't believe me, but now you believe me.
No, I believe
It's
you.
incredible, right?
No,
Hey, bring some Cokes in, please.
Is the end of that? Bring some Cokes in, please. Oh my God. Yeah, it's like a parody of Trump. This would be a Saturday Night Live sketch of Trump doing espionage. Isn't this incredible? I stole the documents by calling the Pentagon, and I told them, bring me something really secret, and I'm going to keep. Hey, could you bring some Cokes in here? By the way, Hillary Clinton would have done this in a heartbeat. She would have given it to perverts, because perverts, no one likes perverts. Oh my God. So anyway, yeah, arrest this guy and sink him in the ocean already. Certainly, everyone ought to be happily tweeting, tooting, what have you. No state funeral for Trump. We certainly can't have that at this point. All right, so that was of some interest. Let's see. We've talked through most of the first segment already. Lots more Trump-related information and stories. I guess we should just run through them here, and I guess we got all day to do it, although we only have about 3 minutes left to run through this one. We'll start with this Washington Post piece. The Justice Department is asking about 2020 fraud claims as well as fake electors. So I guess I suppose this represents an expansion of the areas about which we knew that the special counsel, Jack Smith, if that is his real name, it has been investigating. And I know the focus had been on the fake electors, but you would think that they couldn't make the full case about, like, how do you prove that they're fake electors unless you can also establish that he was lying about having won the election and that was fraudulent? And how did you talk these fake electors into doing this fake election thing? It seems to be connected. Anyway, Josh Dawsey and Devlin Barrett report it this way. The Justice Department's investigation of efforts by Trump and his advisors to overturn the election is barreling forward on multiple tracks, according to people familiar with the matter, with prosecutors focused on ads and fundraising pitches claiming election fraud, as well as plans for fake electors that would swing the election to the incumbent president. Each track poses potential legal peril for those under scrutiny, but also raises tricky questions about where the line should be drawn between political activity, legal advocacy, and criminal conspiracy. Always an interesting question, to be sure. A key area of interest is the conduct of a handful of lawyers who sought to turn Trump's defeat into victory by trying to convince state, local, federal, and judicial authorities that Joe Biden's 2020 election win was illegitimate or tainted by fraud. Investigators have sought to determine to what degree these lawyers, particularly Rudy, Jenna Ellis, John Eastman, Kurt Olson, and Kenneth Chesebro, as well as then Justice Department lawyer Jeffrey Clark, were following specific instructions from Trump or others, and what those instructions were, according to people familiar with the matter, who, like others interviewed for this article, spoke on condition of anonymity. Special counsel Jack Smith's team has extensively questioned multiple witnesses about the lawyers' actions related to fake electors. Pro-Trump substitutes offered up as potential replacements for electors in swing states that Biden won. Washington Post has reported that Giuliani, a personal attorney for Trump who took over his campaign's legal efforts after the election, coordinated the fake elector effort. Ellis helped him urge state legislatures to reject certified Biden results, while Eastman argued to Trump that the vice president, Mike Pence, could accept alternate slates while certifying the electoral votes on January 6th. Chesebro wrote several memos on the fake elector strategy. Olson urged lawsuits to overturn the election results in several states. And Clark pressed Trump's fraud claims from within the Justice Department. So now you have everybody's general role in all of this laid out once again, in case you'd forgotten. Trump's allies have argued that there was nothing criminal about preparing alternate electors in case they were needed. And indeed, people who signed documents to that effect are probably in a lot less trouble. Giuliani, Ellis, Clark, Eastman, Chesebro, and Olson, or their representatives, either did not respond to requests for comment or declined comment on Monday. And, we'll jump right back into this coverage, plus many more stories about the former guy and his treason after this.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept a life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's have to remember to try and keep my eye on all of the possible inputs for information via social media and other various paths to here. John has sent us some more information about what the hell is going on with small and medium-sized and micro businesses. They apparently account for 90% of businesses, 60 to 70% of employment, and 50% of GDP worldwide. In case you were wondering, it doesn't define them unless I click the link, perhaps. But just in case you were wondering, there may be explanations out there. But you were probably thinking, no, I would rather you go back to the story about the former guy and his various violations of law, espionage and treason. Sure. Absolutely, and I will oblige you with that. We continue with the Washington Post piece here about the Department of Justice asking more broadly about fraud and fraud claims post-election, and I guess what What? I don't know. What the hell? What impact does it have? What import was it in the fake electors scheme? Are they two different schemes? Are they necessary to one another, etc.? Jack Smith, that's special prosecutor, of course. Longtime federal prosecutor who was appointed special counsel by Merrick Garland in November, charged Trump this month with 37 counts alleging that he willfully retained classified documents at his Florida residence and pervert club after leaving the White House and obstructed government efforts to retrieve them. Garland also put Smith in charge of a separate investigation of efforts to overturn the election results. That probe appears to be focused on fraud-related charges, according to subpoenas reviewed by the Post and interviews with witnesses, lawyers, and others familiar with evidence being presented to a federal grand jury in Washington. The special counsel's office did not respond to a request for comment on Monday. Its election-focused probe is separate from the Justice Department's prosecution of people directly involved in the January 6th riots, which has yielded hundreds of convictions, including for seditious conspiracy, and it is independent of a criminal probe by the District Attorney of Fulton County, Georgia, that is also examining efforts to overturn the 2020 election. In addition to its focus on fake electors, Smith's team has looked extensively at ads and email pitches that raised funds off Trump's false claims of election fraud, people familiar with the matter said. In the weeks after the election, an advertising firm created 3 ominously named spots for Trump's fundraising efforts: Overwhelming, Stop the Steal, and On Tape. Once again, every accusation is a confession. But when lawyers for the campaign reviewed the advertisements, they raised concerns that the spots contained false information and might not meet network standards, according to people familiar with the matter. The campaign was facing a repeated problem. Trump advisor Jason Miller wrote to Larry Weitzner, an executive at the firm producing the campaign ads for Trump. The campaign's own legal team and data experts cannot verify the BS. He used the real word. I can actually, well, we can have Greg say it.
That's bullshit.
Exactly. Cannot verify the BS being beamed down from the mothership, he wrote. Thank you, Jason Miller. According to 4 people familiar with that email, that was why Giuliani and his lawyers were 0 for 32, Miller added later, I think 0 for 59 or 0 for 60, and I think they went to 1 and 61. They won some minor points somewhere, I think. Anyway, this is an apparent reference, of course, to the number of times that Trump's legal team had challenged the election results in court and lost. The email is one of many pieces of evidence prosecutors have obtained indicating that Trump advisors privately didn't believe or were at least skeptical of voter fraud claims. Some of those messages came as top campaign officials continued to approve advertisements raising money off the claims, and as Trump falsely continued to say the election was, quote, rigged. Miller, who holds a senior role in Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, declined to comment on the email. A person familiar with the situation said, Miller wrote the message in a moment of frustration with the various legal theories and advice from Trump's outside lawyers. In heated days and weeks after Trump lost the 2020 election, Weitzner did not respond to a request for comment. I guess that's a spin. Whatever. Looking to save his job. Stephen Chung. Why, though? He must be I guess he's one of the few people that's actually getting paid. In order to save the job, you'd have to be worried about the money, I would think. Stephen Chung, a spokesman for Trump, decried the release of out-of-context information to the press and said the Department of Justice had no case whatsoever. By the way, let me just point out that Iran contingency plan is out-of-context information that he was hoping to leak to the press. Friendly press who would write about his view of things. And by all accounts, that's exactly what she was. Further, the DOJ has no place inserting itself into reviewing campaign communications, and their meddling in such matters represents a grave danger to the First Amendment and should seriously concern all campaigns and Americans. Unless, of course, there was a crime involved, in which case the investigation is perfectly well suited, I would say. This is the continuation of many witch hunts against President Trump in order to meddle and influence in the 2024 election in order to prevent him from returning to the White House. They will fail. I do kind of love, not really, but ironically, I was going to say sarcastically, love the implications there. The accusation is, well, what's actually happening here is we committed a large number of crimes during and after the 2020 elections. The investigation of those crimes, though, is a crime in itself because you're politicizing the Department of Justice so that we can't win the 2024 election by revealing to people that we committed crimes during the 2020 election, which we don't think is information that people should have access to because then they won't elect us in 2024. Obviously, your attempt to reveal and prosecute that crime is itself an example of the crime of politicizing our elections. Sure, we were the first ones to do it, but not really. We also believe that we only did it because John F. Kennedy did it. And so therefore we're entitled to our shot with it. But I mean, it is pretty ridiculous, right? You hold up a bank in order to finance the 2020 election. And as 2024 rolls around, we say you're caught on videotape financing your election by robbing banks. Oh, sure. Try and politicize the 2024 election. Why don't you? Telling everybody I'm a bank robber. Well, you are one. Well, yes, but you're not allowed to say that until I've finished serving my second term, apparently. You can't prosecute a sitting president, and you can't prosecute a person who wants to be a sitting president. It's really all about the candidate wanting to be president. Why not? What the hell? Whatever you do is legal. Go for it. I mean, whatever. It's what you have to say to try to get yourself off the hook. But quite honestly, they should chop your head off for it. Anyway, Smith's team has sent subpoenas in recent months seeking detailed information about the fundraising ads. Two people familiar with the matter said. The Post viewed one of the subpoenas. Investigators have asked multiple Trump advisors about the formulation of the ads, payment for them, and whether campaign aides knew they were false before they were released. Prosecutors have also subpoenaed information about media buying firms and others involved in the process. People familiar with that effort said, if individuals knowingly used electronic communications, such as emails, to raise funds under false pretenses, that could constitute wire fraud. However, politicians and interest groups frequently use overheated rhetoric to try to raise money, and it's unclear if prosecutors have reached any conclusions about whether the election fraud claims by the Trump campaign crossed a legal line. And fair question there. We'll have to wait and see what their conclusions are. And then, after that, how strong the conclusions were. People who have been questioned by prosecutors say there has been a prolonged and intense focus on what campaign officials knew in the weeks after the election, with investigators comparing their private comments to what they said publicly. During that period, campaign officials were provided reports from at least two research firms paid by Trump's campaign that showed the fraud claims were either false or unproven. Another focus is whether individuals who disagreed with some of the claims were co-opted to participate in fundraising efforts. In one subpoena reviewed by the Post, prosecutors asked for all documents related to the use of Michael R. Pence's name in fundraising, including but not limited to whether his name could or would continue to be used in fundraising, and any individual indicating that they do not want to be or no longer would be a surrogate in fundraising emails. People familiar with the matter say Pence's team blanched at Trump or his advisors making any promises in fundraising emails that Pence would help overturn the election, but did not object to all the emails. Smith's team also has asked for email correspondence among dozens of Trump and Republican aides and advisors, including some figures who were junior staffers. The people familiar with the matter said some of the aides include digital copywriters. Prosecutors have sought, I'll try for a hard reset here. Prosecutors have sought and obtained some evidence that there was widespread disbelief among members of the president's inner circles about the claims of extensive voter fraud, according to subpoenas reviewed by the Post and interviews with people familiar with witness testimony. When Trump wanted to release a press statement saying a single report of fraud was the, quote, tip of the iceberg, campaign advisors argued internally against using that language because they believed there was no evidence for such a claim. The claim went into the news release anyway, according to people familiar with the matter. Prosecutors have homed in on the phrase and the discussion of whether to use it with multiple witnesses, according to people familiar with the investigation. Smith's team has also reviewed news releases and drafts of public statements that were never issued. quizzing witnesses about them, and investigators have obtained emails and messages among Trump advisors disputing claims about election fraud made by people who were also advising Trump but were not on the campaign, people familiar with the matter said. In one example, some Trump advisors discussed the absurdity of a fraud accusation that was passed along from members of Trump's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, to a Trump family member who then sent it to the campaign for research. Multiple witnesses and lawyers said prosecutors have asked repeated questions about Trump entities paying the legal bills for witnesses and whether any strings were attached to such payments, people familiar with the matter said. This is another area of inquiry that could lead to separate charges, witness tampering. Two people with knowledge of the case described some of the investigators as fixated on why certain aides who have been questioned as part of the probe are having their legal bills paid for by Trump entities. It's not uncommon for employers to pay legal costs when employees need a lawyer for issues arising from their jobs. But prosecutors appear to be trying to determine if there's anything untoward about the arrangement in Trump's case. Then there's the question of whether Trump's efforts to get state officials in Georgia to, quote, find more votes for him amounted to a crime. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, whom Trump called after the election, talking about finding enough votes to overcome Biden's margin of victory in the state, is scheduled to be interviewed by investigators with Smith's office on Wednesday in Atlanta, a spokesperson for Raffensperger's office said. That's tomorrow. The interview session has been delayed several times at the request of Smith's office. Raffensperger was previously interviewed by the House committee that investigated January 6th and in front of grand jurors as part of the state-level probe in Georgia, which is being led by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Fani? Is it? How's the A pronounced there? I don't know. Anyway, this would be Raffensperger's first interview with the Justice Department. That concludes this particular article. It points in a million different directions to lots of materials that I have socked away here in Pocket. Man, all right. So what direction do we go next? Let's try this one because the mention was made of the payment of legal fees. I have this article, which we didn't get to the other day, from the New York Times, Shane Goldmacher and Maggie Haberman on this one. As legal fees mount, Trump steers donations into PAC that has covered them. The subheader explains helpfully a previously unnoticed change in Donald Trump's online fundraising appeals allows him to divert a sizable chunk of his 2024 contributions to a group that has spent millions to cover his legal fees, and presumably I don't know, that's the entity covering the legal fees of others, but Trump won't even pay his own legal fees. It's astonishing that he's paying anyone else's, but he's only willing to do it with other people's money, I guess. Facing multiple intensifying investigations, former President Donald J. Trump has quietly begun diverting more of the money he is raising away from his presidential campaign and into political action committee that he has used to pay his personal legal fees. The change, which went unannounced except in the fine print of his online disclosures, raises fresh questions about how Mr. Trump is paying for his mounting legal bills, which could run into the millions of dollars, as he prepares for at least 2 criminal trials, and whether his PAC, Save America, is facing a financial crunch. When Trump kicked off his campaign in November, for every dollar raised online, 99 cents went into his campaign and a penny went to Save America. But Internet archival records show that sometime in February or March, he adjusted that split. Now his campaign's share has been reduced to 90% of donations and 10% goes to Save America. The effect of that change is potentially substantial. Based on fundraising figures announced by his campaign, the fine print maneuver may already have diverted at least $1.5 million to Save America, and the existence of the group has allowed Trump to have his small donors pay for his legal expenses rather than paying for them himself. Stephen Chung, that scumbag who works for him and was quoted in the last article, did not answer detailed questions about why the Trump operation has changed how the funds he's raising are being split. Save America technically owns the list of email addresses and phone numbers of his supporters, one of the former president's most valuable assets, and the campaign is effectively paying the PAC for access to that list, he explained. So that's the excuse. Because the campaign wants to ensure every dollar donated to President Trump is spent in the most cost-effective manner, a fair market analysis was conducted to determine email list rentals would be more efficient by amending the fundraising split between the two entities, Mr. Chung said in a written statement. The different rules governing what political action committees and candidate campaign committees can pay for are both dizzying and somewhat in dispute. But generally, a PAC cannot spend money directly on the candidate's campaign, and a campaign committee cannot pay directly for things that benefit the candidate personally. Of course, I'm sure Donald Trump would say, oh no, it benefits the United States in general when I get legal representation. Anyway, that has nothing to do with it and still wouldn't really qualify those payments. For more than a year before Mr. Trump was a 2024 candidate, Save America has been paying for bills related to various investigations into the former president and his allies. In February of 2022, the PAC announced that it had $122 million in its coffers. By the beginning of 2023, and I guess here I should point out, now that you're talking about $122 million, a substantial amount of money, I'll remind you that these are leadership PACs and super PACs. But that leadership PACs, which are associated with an individual candidate, but not like super PACs, which can't coordinate. But leadership PACs are very frequently used. The rules are loose enough that political operators use them as slush funds, personal expense slush funds, lifestyle funds. Right? Our most infamous example, Rick Santorum, using his leadership PAC to pay for Starbucks and Arby's orders when he was driving through Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, for instance, and everywhere else for that matter. But people do that all the time. It's, it's permissible by law, so they do it. And I guess it's too good an opportunity to pass up, padding your lifestyle with other people's money. Anyway, by the beginning of 2023, the PAC's cash on hand was down to $18 million, so almost $100 million, so more than $100 million, in fact, spent on that. The rest had been spent on staff salaries, on the cost of Mr. Trump's political activities last year, including some spending on other candidates and groups, and in other ways, stolen, for instance. That included the $60 million that was transferred to MAGA Inc., a super PAC that is supporting Mr. Trump. It has nothing to do with him, I'm sure. And more than $16 million went to pay legal bills. Mr. Trump's rivals are not similarly splitting their online proceeds with an affiliated PAC. The websites of former Vice President Mike Pence, former Ambassador Nikki Haley, and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina all direct all of the proceeds to their campaign committees. The same goes for Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, and Vivek Ramaswamy as well. I think this particular situation, specifically because of the use of the leadership PAC to pay legal expenses and potentially other expenses that would be illegal personal use of campaign money, there's an unusual incentive for the leadership PAC to take in more than it normally would, said Adav Noti, Senior Vice President and Legal Director of the Campaign Legal Center. In the run-up to Trump's latest campaign, his legal bills exploded in size. Save America spent $1.9 million in what it identified as legal expenses in the first half of 2022. That figure ballooned to nearly $14.6 million in the second half of last year, federal records show. In late 2022, a Trump advisor said that about $20 million had been set aside by Save America PAC to cover legal expenses. Since then, Trump has been indicted twice, once by a Manhattan grand jury on charges stemming from a hush money payment to a porn star, and once by federal grand jury in Florida on charges including violations of the Espionage Act arising from, you know what. A prominent attorney, Todd Blanche, left his white-collar law firm in April to join the former president's legal team, and is now representing him in both cases. And Trump recently met with about half dozen lawyers in Florida. Apparently he was having real trouble getting someone to sign on and represent him. Trump's legal troubles are deeply intertwined with his political campaign and fundraising efforts. His campaign store is selling an I Stand With Trump t-shirt showing the date of his indictment in Manhattan, 3/30/2023, for instance, for $36. It recently added a second shirt with his Florida indictment date, 6/8/23, for $38. half the featured items on the store's landing page show a fake mugshot and the words "not guilty." And Mr. Trump's usual legal strategy, delay, could prove costly as overlapping teams of white-collar lawyers defend him in the federal case and in the Manhattan criminal case, as well as in the investigation in Georgia, where Trump could yet face another indictment this summer for his role in trying to overturn the 2020 election. He's also facing intensifying investigation, as you know, by special counsel Jack Smith. It remains unclear whether Trump will try to use his campaign funds to pay for lawyers should he run into difficulties with the Political Action Committee, and whether such a move would run afoul of spending rules. He can use the campaign to pay for legal bills that arise out of candidate or office holder activity, and of course, some of the current legal matters fall into that category, and some do not, and some are in a gray area. Mr. Noty said, "It really depends on what matter we're talking about." Jason Torchinsky, a Republican election lawyer, said he believed Trump was barred from using Save America donations to pay his personal legal expenses now that he's a candidate. Oh well, no one's stopping him. Arguing that doing so would be an excessive contribution under Federal Election Commission precedent. Although you'll never get the Federal Election Commission to act on that because it's probably hopelessly deadlocked. And he said Mr. Trump could not use campaign money at all because it would qualify as personal use. There have been signs that Trump's campaigns have been carefully monitoring his expenses. He has mainly attended events organized by other groups as opposed to staging his own large-scale political rallies, which were the lifeblood of his past two runs for president and are one of his favorite parts of campaigning. Those rallies are expensive, costing at least $150,000 and usually more than $400,000. Trump has held only one full-scale rally in the 7 months he has been running, with a second scheduled on July 1st in South Carolina, his first in an early nominating state. A rally in Iowa on May 13th was canceled after a tornado warning, though the weather cleared and DeSantis pointedly held an impromptu event nearby. People familiar with the Trump campaign's plans have said that the dearth of rallies was as much about husbanding resources as it was about getting Trump to engage with voters in a more traditional way. The people also suggested that more large-scale events might come in the fall as the primary race heats up. But the fundraising surges that Trump experienced after his first indictment at the end of March and again in June are expected to obscure a broader fundraising slowdown. His campaign announced that he had raised $12 million in the first week after his first indictment, and $7 million the week after his second one. He will next disclose the state of his PAC and campaign finances in federal filings in July. Trump is unusually dependent on online fundraising. He's held only one major campaign fundraiser that was billed as such by his team, the event at Bedminster on the evening of his indictment, which raised $2 million. All right, almost up to the top of the hour break here, but we can continue with the former guy as a theme if you like. Speaking of the rally issue, I guess, what about if we move over to something new from Amanda Marcotte, who writes over at Salon, this interesting piece, actually an interview with Dave Newert. Gosh, I always hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Trump thinks he has this big army out there still. A MAGA movement betrayed has now morphed. I guess this would be the target audience for such rallies, and maybe might explain why he's not doing the rally thing quite as much, not just the husbanding of resources, but maybe the group that populates the rallies are less than enthused about showing up. In his new book, The Age of Insurrection, David Newert traces the path of the far right since the Capitol riot, Amanda Marcotte writes. And she introduces the piece this way. For most of the press and political establishment, the insurrection of January 6th felt like a shock that came out of nowhere. For journalist Dave Newert, and I never really have figured that name out, Neiwert, you know who I'm talking about, writes all the time these days at Daily Kos, among other places, but long history with the Netroots. Everyone knows who he is. But I guess if you haven't seen him live and in person, you might wonder, as I do, about the pronunciation of the name. Well, anyway, David has reported on the far right for over 3 decades, and for him, it was all too predictable. Fascist movements, Newert tells Salon, have been present in America since at least the early 1900s, eager and ready to commit violence for their cause, and Donald Trump offered a catalyst. In his new book, The Age of Insurrection, The Radical Right's Assault on American Democracy, he traces how groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers have their roots in an authoritarian militia movement that goes back decades. He also details how knowing this history can help the rest of the country anticipate what comes next, as the violent impulses of the MAGA right have not receded. Newart spoke to Salon about his new book and how what was once a fringe movement has captured the Republican Party. The interview, it is helpfully noted, has been interviewed for clarity and length and appears below. I guess question number one. Most in the mainstream media talk about the events of January 6th like they were a surprise. They came out of nowhere. But you were out there early, warning people that this could happen. Why wasn't this surprising? Now, at this point, David should get his due, of course, in answering this. But I will also point out that there is another news item out here that I guess we could share next from NBC News, covering a new report issued by the Senate Homeland Security Committee. The title of this piece, Ryan Nobles writes in NBC News, "Planned in Plain Sight. Senate report finds intel agencies failed in the lead up to January 6th. But yeah, I guess those of us who live our lives very much online, like Dave Newart, could tell you, yeah, I mean, he knew it first and in greater depth and for a longer period of time. But many otherwise normal Americans could have told you, yeah, it didn't come as a surprise because they were talking about it openly for weeks, if not months, prior to the event and saying, we're coming to the Capitol to riot on January 6th. And why nobody believed that, I can't tell you. Well, anyway, his actual answer is, I've been writing about extremists for a long time, since at least the 1990s. My main concern over all the years has been the infiltration of extremist beliefs into the mainstream of the conservative movement and the Republican Party. There's been a gradual radicalization of America, or of the American, as he puts it. I published a book in 2009, before the Tea Party had actually erupted, warning of this radicalization process that really started off after 9/11. We certainly saw it take off once the Tea Party happened. It was very clear to anyone who had experience with the Patriot movement that this stuff was now being mainstreamed at a massive level through the auspices of the Tea Party. Among the people that were responsible for that was Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers and others like him. These people are still very much with us, and they played a huge role in January 6th. Let's set up the next question before the break if we can. Amanda asks, I noticed that one name you didn't say, Donald Trump. There's this narrative out there that Donald Trump is what radicalized Republicans, and this is his doing. Here we go. Welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show. And let's jump straight back into this, where we left off in this interview between Amanda Marcotte and David Newart. She is formulating question number 2 here, saying, I noticed you didn't mention Donald Trump. A lot of people, there's a narrative out there that this is Donald Trump is what radicalized Republicans. Is that the case? That he has a magical hold on people that's turning ordinary conservatives into fascists. What's your feeling on that, and how do you understand the role he plays in the larger MAGA movement? Well, the answer, I don't underplay the role that Trump played. It was critical to the final radicalization of the GOP, but he himself was a symptom of that growing radicalization. He really represented this conspiracy worldview that kept bubbling up on the right. His whole political career was founded on spreading the birther conspiracy theory. There's no doubt that he played the major role of fulfilling their ambitions. He was exactly the kind of politician those of us who had studied the radical right for years feared happening to America. If you understand fascism and neo-fascism, it's actually been present in America since at least the early 1900s. Those threads that we now identify as fascist, many of them had their origins in the United States. Hitler was inspired by the Native American genocide, and it inspired the Holocaust. He based the brown shirts on the Ku Klux Klan. The Nuremberg laws were inspired by the Jim Crow laws in the United States. But even though we had those threads in our political system, fascism itself never took root in the United States, in large part because there wasn't a really good political space for it. It was always overwhelmed by democratic forces and the robust quality of American democracy. But our democratic institutions have been increasingly hollowed out by extreme wealth and by right-wing forces that are innately anti-democratic over the last 30 years. I mean, I guess as I'm reading this, I'm sort of thinking it might be worth rephrasing some of that and saying fascism didn't need to take over and take root and take over in America. First you would take root, then you would take over. For a number of reasons. As he points out, right, we still had this still robust democracy, but also the democratic system, such as it was, by excluding the people who would ordinarily have opposed these fascist policies from the voter pool, and instead opening it up to people and saying it's a legitimate thing to democratically adopt fascist racial policy in the United States. What need would you have of a fascist governmental structure to implement fascist policy if the democratic one was doing it just fine? You could have the trappings of democracy, talk about freedom and show off your freedom and praise yourself for allowing freedoms, because the only people allowed to exercise the freedom to establish and maintain this so-called freedom were people who agreed to buy into, for the most part, the fascist racial policies in the United States. I mean, why a fascist dictator would be necessary to the implementation of the Jim Crow laws is it's a mystery why you would think that was necessary if you enabled and what am I thinking of here? I don't know. Enabling, I guess, is the right word. But if you enabled and fostered a system whereby people they were casting ballots, so it must be democracy, right? And were instead adopting these policies all by themselves, you wouldn't need a fascist dictator to impose them. What would be the point? It'd be an unnecessary distraction. And in the meantime, the fact that ballots were being cast is good PR. Freedom. Yay. Except for, everybody who didn't have any. Anyway, that's an alternative way of viewing, I think, the same phenomenon. He's not wrong here. It's just a different way of viewing this same phenomenon. Anyway, as he says here, our democratic institutions have increasingly been hollowed out, right? And they are now creating a space for fascists to emerge and gain traction. We've been very lucky through most of American history to not have that critical element that makes fascism actually succeed and gain traction, which is to have a singular, charismatic leader. It has to be somebody with charisma and who has popular appeal. We've never seen that on the radical right. Most people on the radical right were horrendous people who turned everybody off. But when Trump emerged and was given a mainstream platform, he insinuated himself into the mainstream. That was the realization of a lot of our fears. Now they have their charismatic leader. The fascist strands in American politics are emerging. And though it's not, I would hasten to point out that Donald Trump is any less horrendous than the rest. It's just that for some reason he's perceived differently. Trump has now twice appeared in court to face felony indictments, Amanda asks next. Both times he really tried to amp up his followers into doing another January 6th. He pushed violent rhetoric. He aligned himself with the Waco fire. He couldn't have been more over the top about this. Why did January 6th happen, but they kind of didn't heed the call to riot to stop him from getting indicted? And his answer, there's a complex set of elements involved. First, Trump's followers were able to see that he was all too happy to throw them all under the bus after they committed acts of violence on his behalf. Some people have peeled away from him because of that. He didn't have the ability to go on Twitter and send out "Be There" and "Will Be Wild" tweets. Organizations like the Proud Boys are now much less focused on Trump than on their ongoing post-January 6th strategy of targeting more localized entities like school boards, libraries, state legislatures, that sort of thing. One of the aspects of authoritarian personalities is that they uniformly overestimate, wildly, the amount of popular support they actually have. They believe they represent the real America, right? Trump thinks he has this big army out there still. There are still really dedicated, fervent believers who will go out there and holler on his behalf and threaten people and get out their AR-15s. but there are fewer of them now than there were before. And not having the mainstream entity in power, which was the case during his tenure as president, makes a big difference for them. Next up, your book is about how Trump may have lost and January 6th didn't work, but we should still be extremely concerned about this fascist movement, which is not given up. How do you square that concern with feeling like he's lost some of his enthusiasm, right? That gives us a chance to play our enthusiasm state. The people who've been radicalized into authoritarian worldviews are still very much enmeshed in that. Some have shifted their loyalties to Ron DeSantis or whoever else they might have. More importantly, there is still a substantial part of the country who are eager for and anticipates real violence. They're all here for a civil war. They have AR-15s in their basements. Not always in the basement either. They're capable of violence, and we never know what's going to trigger them. I don't think that a right-wing extremist coup is actually feasible or possible. I do think that they're going to continue to try to replace American democracy with an authoritarian autocracy. A lot of people are very much working towards that. In the process, some of them are going to be acting out violently, maybe in ways that will re-wake the country up to the threat to democracy that we face. I don't think they'll win. I don't think they're capable of winning. But I think a lot of people can get hurt, and I think there will be a lot of people hurt by this, including them. One thing I've learned about right-wing extremists over 30 years of covering them is that people who get involved in these movements destroy their lives. It's one of the most toxic forces in America. It draws people into the abyss. It ruins their family relationships, ruins their relationships with the community. A lot of time, they wind up in prison. But even more so, there are people there are the people who they target who will definitely also be hurt. I am thinking of the shooter in Colorado who targeted the gay bar, and the shooter in Allen, Texas, who just went to a mall and started ripping off rounds. Amanda follows this up by asking, when you talk about the mainstreaming of these attitudes, the Club Q shooting, it's a really good example. Despite the fact that we've already seen this escalating of transphobic and anti-queer rhetoric and how it's led to death and murder, you nonetheless got this widespread right-wing boycott over Budweiser because they had a trans influencer do a little commercial for them. What are we to make of this? That's the nature of the beast they created. Think about how Trump tried to push back on the anti-vaxxers because he wanted to take credit for the vaccine. He dropped it because the pushback from his own followers was so intense and so immense. Or think of how Fox News in December of 2020 briefly attempted to resuscitate their journalistic credibility by calling Arizona for Biden, which brought the wrath of all those Fox viewers down on them. Their broadcasts promptly flipped. Even after the January 6th insurrection, they were just justifying the attack on Congress and normalizing it. Also, normalizing the Trump won discourse. What all these people found is that this beast that they've created is not something they can control. Leopards eat faces, after all, I would add. The authoritarians follow their own impulses and they believe their own things. What they believe is what everybody else has to get in line to parrot. They are so bellicose and threatening, and their numbers are quite large. But not as large as I guess Donald Trump thinks they are. That's the end of the portion of the interview that's offered for our review. It did give me a couple other ideas about other stories that are tucked away. Let me just scroll back down and where I had some sort of notes, mental notes to myself. But you know that they fall away pretty quickly. Oh, yes, right. The AR-15 thing. Total, just for a moment, to jump off of the Trump track here. I wanted to tell you a gun fail-ish story in which nobody gets shot. So it doesn't actually count usually as a gun fail story, but I'm going to tell it nonetheless because it's rather incredible. And there's also another rather more spectacular gun fail story, except for the fact that it's not an accidental shooting. It was an intentional shooting. So, but some gun stories that this, reminds me of that I'm willing to jump off track for just a moment. The first story is, and no surprise here. Are they both out of Florida? That's another thing. Well, at least one of them is a Florida story. And let me see if I can scroll down and find this thing. Oh boy, I don't even know where I'm going to see it now that I think about it. But I could probably call it up, and because it was a pretty splashy story. But no, it was Texas, of course. So Florida and Texas pairing up again. By the way, Florida and Texas also in the news together as states that have seen cases of malaria in the last week or two. So good job taking care of your public health. You ruined the public health infrastructure in both of those states, and now both of those states, well, they're both southern states, the southernmost continental United States. So I guess they were bound to see malaria first, probably more going to happen no matter what you did with the public health infrastructure there. But it can't help that, you've turned everybody off to the idea of germ theory, for instance. But okay. Anyway, first, the Florida story, and I'm scrolling to find it here too. SFDB, I think, brought this one to my attention. And what a story it was. Let's see. Where's the original? I'm going to have to call up the, oh, dang. Is that not it? Okay. At any rate, I think I can retell the story anyway. But why is this not, all right, well, I guess I got to keep scrolling, and I missed my shot at this one. Anyway, the Florida story is, I guess, a little bit further down. The story of a guy who mistakenly believes that there's an intruder on his property. The same old story, and shoots at him, and guess what? It's not an intruder at all. It is his pool cleaning guy. That's it. All right. Well, let's see. I think this is the original tweet from SFDB that has it. And here's the original news story. Here we go. Finally. WESH in, I guess, Orlando, Florida, Channel 2, the NBC affiliate. Florida homeowner fired 30 gunshots at pool cleaner he mistook for intruder, sheriff says. Well, the quick rundown here of the story. A man won't face charges after he opened fire on a pool cleaner who he mistook for an intruder. Pinellas, do they say it with the L's? Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri said. According to the sheriff's office, the two homeowners called 911 around 9 p.m. on Sunday after spotting a man on their land. The sheriff said that the man was hired by the homeowners to clean their pool and had been working for them for around 6 months to a year. But apparently they never recognized him because, faceless yard worker to them that they have no idea who the person is. The victim had been busy with other appointments and showed up at the home later than expected. Deputies said the pool cleaner did not notify the homeowners that he was coming that late at night. He usually stops by on Thursday or Friday afternoon, Gualtieri said. According to the sheriff's office, one of the homeowners said she was in the family room when she saw a man she did not recognize through the sliding glass doors. She locked the door in a panic, I guess, and told her husband that a random person was on their property that, just happened to be around the pool with pool cleaning equipment, but whatever. A person I didn't recognize. Now, how do you know you didn't recognize them if it was, say, 9 o'clock and too dark for you to be able to recognize them? How do you know it's a random person? You don't. Second of all, it's summer. It's 9 p.m. There's probably enough light down in Florida to actually see maybe it's a little darker to the south, but who knows? At any rate, she becomes panicky because reasons. And in fact, one of the reasons that they become panicky is because they're the kind of people who have bought themselves an AR-15 and keep it in the closet because they're afraid of things in general, and then something, confirms their priors, and they see somebody, and essentially it becomes, oh boy, a chance to unload an AR-15 at a living meat target and still be in the right. The homeowner yelled for the person to get out and go away. Then he heard noises. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. The homeowner heard noises? I guess, but one of the noises could be somebody leaving. Anyway, the woman called 911 while the man, a former lieutenant colonel from the Army, That's the way it's phrased. Grabbed his AR-15 rifle from their bedroom closet, not the basement, and fired shots at the victim, who was on their pool deck with a flashlight, authorities said. The sheriff said the flashlight made the homeowner think a burglar was entering his home via the pool, apparently. The husband fired 2 rounds through the sliding glass door, and the victim was hit by the glass. That's really interesting. Now, he was unaware that the victim had fled the backyard and fired additional rounds. He fired a total of 30 rounds in 90 seconds. According to the sheriff's office, the homeowner acted within the law, so no crime occurred. It was lawful, but awful, the sheriff said. Well, I gotta tell you, there's a lot of problems with this story, and you might have noticed what some of them were as I was telling it. Like, for instance, 30 rounds and 0 hits. How do you like that? How's your firearms training going? That's definitely something you're going to have to keep up. I don't know whether I guess he's a retired lieutenant colonel, probably, from the Army, but this is a supposedly trained guy. These are certainly the people who say, I was in the Army. I rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. I know what I'm doing with firearms. But, real firearms experts who are actually trying to stay safe with things will tell you, this is something you have to practice all the time. You got to stay in practice. The fact that you were trained 20 years ago is of no use. Those skills deteriorate and you got to keep training. But you don't have to actually keep training if you have an AR-15 because you can just spray bullets everywhere. Right? Maybe I hit something, maybe I don't. But 30 rounds, I guess, emptied his magazine and hit nobody. And the guy was on his pool deck, so he was pretty close to the house. Remember, the fact that he's on the pool deck, and this pool can't be too far from the house, because being on the pool deck with a flashlight and then thinking, well, this is a burglar trying to enter my house, sounds like it's pretty close, Secondly, I'm just loving the fact that the guy shoots out his own sliding glass doors. That's incredible to me. What a Rambo moment. Lieutenant Colonel from the Army couldn't even keep his head on straight to open the sliding door so that he didn't smash it to bits. He actually was so afraid that he had to kill this guy immediately that he shot through his own sliding glass door rather than spend that second getting the glass out of the way so he didn't hurt himself, maybe, or just, why have to pay for, well, I'm sure that's the last thing on his mind, et cetera, et cetera. But remember that he said, he yelled at the person to get out and go away, presumably with the sliding glass doors closed. So that's the warning to I'm standing my ground. I'm warning him. I'm telling him he has to get out of here. Get on. I'm sure that was totally audible outside. And then he heard noises. The noise of his sliding glass door shattering. Yeah. And again, talking about the guy being in close proximity, he was injured. He wasn't shot. He was injured by the broken glass of the sliding glass door projecting outwards because the guy is blasting away at it. That scratched him. That's how close he was. He still missed 30 times. Then he's unaware that the guy has actually fled the backyard. So in other words, now he's shooting blindly into the darkness with no idea where his target is. Another thing you're absolutely, positively not supposed to do in gun safety land. But he didn't violate any laws because firing randomly is... Now, there's no follow-up to the story that I know of yet. There's no word on whether... Well, for that matter, there's no word on whether any of his neighbors were shot dead and have been left for dead in their nearby homes for days. Nobody's searching to see what's going on. Or... no word on people showing up and saying, hey, a-hole, you shot the crap out of my car. Here's a bill for $30,000 or something like that. He's within the law. I don't know. Anyway, by the way, speaking of within the law, the pool cleaner was contracted to be there. He was supposed to be there. Maybe not at that time. I don't know. Doesn't matter that much to me. Would have been an interesting case if he had shot back, right? I'm standing my ground. I'm supposed to be here. So I thought there was a burglar in the home who had killed the homeowners and he was coming to kill me. So I shot back. Of course, probably not. And I've gotten if there's any chance whatsoever that the pool cleaner is a minority of any sort, I'm sure that would not work. Anyway, doesn't matter. Probably wouldn't work anyway, but just what an amazing thing, firing, through his own window and out into the night. And I just thought that was astonishing. And by the way, another observation that I made in talking about this yesterday on Mastodon, while he was doing this, making this gigantic, as I said, gigantic and near catastrophic mistake, the whole time, in all likelihood, he is thinking, this is exactly why I have an AR-15. And exactly why no government bureaucrat should ever tell me I shouldn't. This is the reason I bought. He was convinced he was in the right. What he was doing was spraying bullets into the neighborhood at night for no reason. Lives are at stake. He is 100% completely in error about the situation. Now, he might be within his legal rights to shoot at an intruder on his land, but he breaks all the gun safety rules. And he's just plain wrong about who this person in his yard is. But at the time, he's 100% sure that he's absolutely right about who that person is. And an AR-15 will then do his talking for him. Now, mind you, he misses, which is incredible. But, a separate issue. But the whole time, he's sure he's right, when in fact, he's totally wrong. But wrong doesn't matter as much when there are 30 rounds to be emptied out of an AR-15. Wrong doesn't help anybody. The logic of being the person that is supposed to be there helps you not at all if you get shredded by an AR-15. And so all of this, he panics and he's so scared that he shoots through his own back door. He doesn't even, get the warning out audibly to the guy. He empties the magazine. He shoots blindly at nothing. He doesn't know who's out there. He's not even aware that the guy is long since gone. This is a person who will tell you, I'm trained. So, it's just nuts what we have going on out there. And I just wanted to point that out. The other gun story, by the way, I have seen it, and I did see that Scott had sent me a copy of this, and Mastodon makes it somewhat more difficult for me to figure out where it went when he sent it to me, but he did, and I don't know the link to which version of the story he sent me, but the basic story has been covered by everyone. I'll grab the CNN coverage of it just to acknowledge that it happened. Texas girl who shot her father and then herself has died, authorities say. That was obviously the intent, I think, of shooting herself in this case. Claire Colbert and Amanda Musa from CNN reporting this story. No, I think I have the wrong one here, because this, I guess, must have happened again earlier. And which is amazing, because the girl in the story that I was looking for was 12 years old. And I found that rather astonishing that this would happen. But the big news part of it was that, one, that the girl was 12, and two, that they had recently posed for pictures with their guns, the girl and father. Let me see if I can find, and then the current story. And, I don't know. Is this the one here? This is the Daily Mail version of it, which is disturbing enough. I guess it is kind of an old story, because is it the sentencing that's going on here? Because the current story from June 25th, as reported, unfortunately, by the Daily Mail, helps explain things here. Saying here in their version of it is exclusive. Girl, 12, who shot her father before killing herself in botched murder pact with friend after they plotted to kill their families and pets, then run away together, is pictured for the first time posing with guns alongside her armed dad. The bullet points in the subheader give us the quick story. Emma Brown shot her father in the stomach before turning the gun on herself. She had plotted to kill her entire family and pets in a murder pact with a friend. The second girl, 12, also was sentenced for her part in the incident on March 14th in Texas. So this is the story. And I guess the reason I'm it appears to be an old story is I'm looking at an October 2022 story about it in CNN, and I guess they've just gotten around to, I guess it happened a while ago, and now they are sentencing the two of them. I just find that astonishing, although it's entirely possible, and I'm still skimming this CNN story. I'll take the break and try and find Scott's version of it. It is entirely possible that this has happened more than once in Texas, and maybe multiple 12-year-olds. Clearly, there were two 12-year-olds that had this idea of murdering their entire families. I wonder where those strange ideas came from. Anyway, I don't actually intend to talk a great deal about that story. I just wanted to note that it was on the record, and I just sort of used the Florida Rambo story as a launching pad to acknowledge the existence of that story. I think I should get back to the former guy, and they've got guns around. I don't know why nobody has decided that no Trump children have decided to murder their entire family, as far as I know. But, I guess I don't want to encourage anybody to actually do that, but I don't know. It's curious how that never happens to those guys. It just happens to the rest of us who all have to die for the Trump policies. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm a little bit hung up on this one, but I have found the article that Scott sent to me. And by the way, if you're on the either the Bird site or the Mammoth Mastodon site, Twister Cat is Scott's identity online, so you can follow along the prompts that he sends my way. This time, he had sent me the tweet of Brian Dawson, I don't know. What's the story with Brian Dawson here? Radical right equals radical left equals radically wrong. How do you like that? Disinformation betrays all who fought for freedom. Hashtag I am John Brown. Hashtag gun owner for gun reform. Okay. And, hashtag, let's see, trickle up and stump a Republican. Okay. Well, I'm not sure what to make of this guy. Anyway, I guess his sentiments on the gun angle of this story are similar. 12-year-old Emma Brown shot her father, a licensed Texas gun dealer, in the stomach. He survived, but she shot and killed herself. She had plotted to kill her entire family and pets in a murder pact with a friend, also 12, who was sentenced for her part. We are a sick nation. It seems to be the case. Any link to a story on it? No, not in this one, and it's not linked to any other tweets as far as I can tell. So, I don't know. I was going to look for some information to try to answer the questions sent to me by listener Adkaratic. Have I got the, we've had your comments read out on the air before, and, just sort of, I guess, noting, and I guess it was about this story, not the Florida story. I guess it's applicable to both, but I imagine you're talking about the Texas story when you said, there's something going on here that we don't know. What was happening in that home? Yes. I would guess. Like, if you're talking about the Florida story, I would say there, in all likelihood, nothing in particular going on in that home, just crazy Florida people. But in Texas, how two 12-year-olds come to the conclusion that they both need to murder their entire families. Yeah, probably something going on. You could make a guess, but there's nothing on the record here that makes it safe to guess which direction the problems are running in here. But yeah, clearly there's some story there. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could try to parse like a Daily Mail type reporting about it, because they're likely to, just blurt out all the worst possible ideas in order to sensationalize the story. But I really don't know. But there's clearly something. And why the pets? Well, they're 12. Is all I can say. And too bad, because their lives are over now. Or one girl was sentenced and then one girl is dead. And I don't know. Yeah, people who want to commit suicide in a suicide pact they frequently say, will find some means of doing it, but not one that's so easy to take all the family and pets with them, right? Like if you decide to take poison, jump off a building, hang yourself, whatever, the job of hanging your entire family, really, it just makes it extremely difficult. Whereas guns make it really easy. And that's the real point here. Okay. Now getting back onto the track of stories, more in the political wheelhouse. It's not that the gun stories are not or not even that they're not political, but okay. Moving along. As I said, there was an NBC News story that related to one of the stories we were reciting before. Do I still have it open here, or do I want to do it? No, I guess I'll have to do it all over again. Planned in plain sight. You remember that one? The NBC News story. Planned in plain sight. Senate report finds intel agencies failed in the lead up to January 6th. The FBI and DHS downplayed the potential for violence, even as rioters openly planned to attack the Capitol online. Democrats on the Senate Homeland Security Committee found. Okay. Ryan Nobles and Ryan Riley, the two Ryans, got together on this piece. Federal law enforcement agencies failed to correctly analyze a wide range of intelligence showing the potential for violence on January 6, 2021. Democrats on the Senate Homeland Security Committee concluded in a report released Tuesday. And remember, they are the majority. That's the committee has reached that conclusion. The report, written by the committee's chair, the quiet but powerful workhorse Gary Peters of Michigan, and staff, provides specific examples of threats of violence and plans for an attack on the Capitol that were collected by agencies in the lead up to January 6th, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis. That's I&A, as they refer to them there in parentheses, so I guess that's how we'll hear about them going forward. The report concludes that the agencies consistently downplayed the potential for violence, and as a result, the government did not prepare the proper security apparatus for Washington that day. At a fundamental level, the agencies failed to fulfill their mission and connect the public and non-public information they received, the report reads, pointing to internal emails and documents that demonstrate the breadth and gravity of the threats these agencies received related to January 6th. I have to stop here for comment. I want to, maybe you'll reach the conclusion before I do, but one, I want to stop and reiterate. This is a report of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Why is there a Homeland Security Committee? Because there is now a Department of Homeland Security and somebody needs to oversee them. Why did we create the Department of Homeland Security? We created the Department of Homeland Security in the wake of the 9/11 attacks to address what? Now everybody's finally, yes, coming to this conclusion, right? If you're listening along, we established the Department of Homeland Security to, because there had been intelligence community and law enforcement community failures to detect less than open, but still available through intelligence gathering means, information that indicated that an attack of some sort was in fact coming on or about 9/11. And we were very upset in the wake of the attack that they had somehow misinterpreted or been unable to correctly interpret, for however you want to put it, the information that there was about the possibility of an attack, and that had they been better coordinated and been allowed to share this information across agencies, et cetera, we might have been able to predict and intervene and prevent this catastrophic attack. And so we were going to establish the Department of Homeland Security that would foster precisely that sort of cross-platform sharing of information, communications, analysis, etc., so that this would never happen again. And now we are reading the report of the Committee on Homeland Security, which tells us that 22 years down the road, we have gotten nowhere. The information wasn't in Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, what have you. The information was in plain English. It wasn't in private emails or even encrypted anything. It was out in the open on social media. Americans, at the urging of the then President of the United States, openly planning an attack on the Capitol on a date certain, and the Department of Homeland Security, whose whole reason for existence is to catch these sorts of things that were previously, if not uncatchable, were simply not being caught because of the maze of bureaucracy and the various intelligence gathering services and law enforcement services not coordinating, not talking to another. This will eliminate that problem. Well, apparently we have not. We've spent trillions of dollars doing it, but it hasn't worked. So that should be understood as a subtext for this entire thing. Apparently, I don't know what to tell you, but if there has to be an inclination, and I think maybe there does have to be an inclination among the intelligence services for handling this sort of information and working on the assumption that no, they don't really mean that. We can't really have a massive crackdown and deprive, thousands of Americans of their individual liberties and freedoms and keep them out of prison. We can't put them all in jail on the suspicion of that they might have, radical views that might be protected First Amendment privileges. I don't know. But as long as we're going to continue to do that, I guess, we're just going to miss these things. If the presumption is always, it's just overheated rhetoric. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, but it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere in solving this problem that the Homeland Security apparatus was supposed to solve. Okay, so as an example, we continue with the article. On January 2nd, 2021, 4 days before the riot, the social media platform Parler sent a post from a user on its site to the FBI that read, "This is not a rally and it's no longer a protest. This is a final stand where we are drawing the red line at Capitol Hill. Don't be surprised if we take the Capitol building." So one, that was being said and we were, maybe it's overheated rhetoric. And two, Parler, which is a right-wing chat site, said, this may be too unusual and too dangerous even for us to ignore. We send it to the FBI, and the FBI, thank you for contacting the FBI. Press 1 if you think it's terrorism. Okay. What do you do? That post was one of many alluding to the potential for violence leading up to January 6th, but the report found that despite such violent online rhetoric, the FBI and the I&A continued to downplay the threat and instead advised U.S. Capitol Police and the Washington Metropolitan Police to prepare for a normal political rally. I guess I'll stop here, too, and just say there are two possible explanations for this, and one is that's just the inclination of law enforcement and will probably never change it. And maybe we never should change that because changing it would probably lead to an unnecessary and unjustifiable crackdown on civil liberties in this country. Although, we never have to encourage them to do that when you're talking about Quaker war protesters. Those they infiltrate and deprive people of their civil liberties there. But militias that say, let's overthrow the government and install a dictator. That one were like, oh, kid gloves for those guys. And that's a problem all by itself. But I guess we should also say it's also possible that, remember that these apparatuses were in the hands of the Trump administration. You should always entertain the possibility that there were Trump-installed bureaucrats saying, I order you to ignore that so that I can facilitate the riot of January 6th, which I know to be coming. That's a complicating factor, too. So, what was shocking is that this attack was essentially planned in plain sight in social media, Peters said in an interview, and yet it seemed as if our intelligence agencies completely dropped the ball, or were complicit, in one way or another. In an internal email from the FBI's Washington field office, cited in the report, it outlined a collection of online threats, including a long list of videos, social media posts, and message board activity detailing plans for an attack on Washington, but the email ultimately concluded that the threats were isolated and not evidence of a serious problem. FBI WFO, Washington Field Office, does not have any information to suggest these events will involve anything other than First Amendment protected activity, the email said, adding that the FBI had identified no credible or verified threat to the activities associated with January 6, 2021. According to the report, similar streams of intelligence continued to flood federal agencies tasked with keeping watch for violent activity. Even if you channel it to the right place, they don't care. But still, on the morning of January 6th, as large crowds were already starting to gather on the National Mall, a senior watch officer at the DHS National Operations Center wrote, there is no indication of civil disobedience. In fact, the report concludes that intelligence analysts were more concerned that violence could break out between the crowd and counter-protesters, who, by the way, were not there. We still see no evidence on the ground of potential for violence. Well, let me ask you this. Do you see on the ground the potential for there not being any counter-protesters? Because that was being planned in plain sight on social media, too. How are we doing on that front? I don't know. Maybe it's in the report, maybe it's not. But it's a question. So, as we were saying, in fact, the report concludes that they were more worried about violence between the protesters and counter-protesters, including left-leaning groups like Antifa, if they are, in fact, left-leaning. Many of the people involved in Antifa are perhaps left-leaning, but being anti-fascist is a centrist position. Just want to point that out, even though it's useless in this situation. Anyway, where were we? Right. Oh, they were worried about violence breaking up between the groups, like maybe Antifa. And more worried about that than Trump supporters on the National Mall would become a direct threat to members of Congress. I'm sure that was hard to imagine, but they said they were going to do it. The report also contends that while the FBI was focused on preventing attacks by lone wolf extremists, while not doing enough to make sure law enforcement agencies were adequately prepared, given the volume of threats online. The threats to the Capitol on January 6th were not made solely in private conversations that required secretive law enforcement investigative tactics to detect, the report states. On the contrary, these threats were made openly, often in publicly available social media posts, and FBI and INA were aware of them. The FBI is rightly constrained from taking investigative or enforcement action against an individual merely on the basis of First Amendment protected speech, the report continues. However, the FBI also has an obligation to take into account the larger threat picture, including social media and online calls for violence, when there is a significant increase in threats that may indicate a growing danger of violence. In total, the report reveals that the FBI issued only 2 intelligence reports related to the potential for violence on January 6th. One originated from the New Orleans field office on January 5th, and another later that night from the Norfolk field office in Virginia. Both reports were limited in scope and were not distributed widely by the FBI, according to the report, and neither... by the way, good news, breaking news from Apple News Top Story. Supreme Court ruled that state legislatures do not have unfettered power to draw electoral districts. So that should be of some interest to Joan and the rest of you watching the SCOTUS picture. Okay. The intelligence reports, where do we leave off in this one? Both reports, both New Orleans and Norfolk, limited, and neither FBI headquarters nor Washington field office issued their own reports. The intelligence reports that were issued dealt with the threats of political extremism nationwide and did not address the specific threat to Washington or the Capitol itself. Peters compared the obvious intelligence misses to the mistakes made in the lead up to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I wonder if he makes my point. I think the failure was largely a failure of imagination to see threats that the Capitol could be breached as credible, despite the fact that the threats were shared publicly and in such high volume in a variety of ways. And I think the failure, in a lot of ways, echoes the findings of the 9/11 Commission, which identified similar failures to take warnings seriously. Yes, but put the two together and say, what the F have we been doing this whole time? The Senate report comes as the Justice Department's Inspector General continues its own investigation into the FBI and DOJ failures ahead of the Capitol attack. While Tuesday's report goes into great detail about the lack of preparation by the various security and law enforcement agencies, it does not absolve then President Donald Trump for his role in fueling the violence that occurred on that day. It echoes the House January 6th committee's conclusion that Trump was largely to blame for the events of that day, saying his false claims about the 2020 election results, coupled with his tweet inviting supporters to Washington, quote, directly contributed to this attack. But, the report's conclusion reads, the fact remains that the federal agencies tasked with preventing domestic terrorism and disseminating intelligence, namely the FBI and I&A, did not sound the alarm, and much of the violence that followed on January 6th may have been prevented had they done so. Although the January 6th committee had a team of staffers dedicated to investigating federal authorities' failures to prepare for the Capitol attack, the panel's executive summary in its final report avoided the type of direct criticism of law enforcement that's laid out in Tuesday's Senate Homeland Security Committee report. As NBC News first reported in November, staff on the January 6th committee probing law enforcement failures were told that the panel's report would focus on Trump, which left much of their work on the cutting room floor. The committee did, however, release transcripts of the testimony they collected, much of which is cited in the Senate Homeland Security Committee report. The report also outlines a long list of recommendations to prevent similar failures in the future. But really, what's the point? The committee calls for DHS and the FBI to complete full after-action reviews of their failures in the lead up to January 6th and to improve the process for analyzing and disseminating intelligence. The report also calls for Congress's certification of future presidential elections to be declared national security special events, which would mobilize law enforcement and provide special security enhancements. That sounds like a good idea. So that's not a bad conclusion. The other conclusion, as I said, is my own, is we're not getting anywhere with this whole Homeland Security apparatus. Not that I think a smart idea would be to dismantle it at this point, but we certainly could demand, I don't know, if it was, I demand to see a manager. I want my money back. This is a real disappointment. We'll just leave it at that. Okay, let's see. Other things to share with you. There are many. And which one can I fit in before the break? That is an open question. Okay, let's see. How about, why don't we throw this one in here? Since it's Supreme Court Day, and poor Joan is stuck watching that, and I don't know whether we'll, maybe we can grab a quick report. I don't think we'll get a good digested report that we can read in time on what we just heard from Apple News. And I don't have a link to that thing in Apple News either because I didn't click. Shoot. All right. Well, at any rate, you will have heard that this is the news. But here's a Supreme Court related piece that we might be able to squeeze in our final moments together today. Also from Slate. So they get called twice in this one. But this is Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern. And always of value reading what they have to say about what's going on at the Supreme Court. And I guess in ways that Joan has argued very clearly when she's been on the air with us, may be related to the decisions we're seeing of late and expecting beginning today. The timing of Alito's private jet scandal couldn't be more damning. Cast in light of a recent ruling, the justice's self-serving duplicity looks even worse. So just as an internal matter, his timing is bad. But there's also the bad timing, / good timing, and I assume that's what really drove things. Breaking these stories just ahead of possible multiple catastrophic rulings from the Supreme Court. Is it raising the pressure and causing them to back off? Would they have landed on these conclusions anyway for some other reason? Not sure. But while they strike while the iron's hot and see more reasons why Alito's BS is worse than ever. By the way, this is noted up at the top. This is part of Opinion Palooza, Slate's coverage of the major decisions of the Supreme Court this June. They too are on SCOTUS watch for the latest stuff. But the fact that this coverage of Alito's excuse making is part of Opinion Palooza, I think acknowledges that connection that we were wondering about, hinting at. I think it's pretty overt, and Jones made a pretty good case for it. So anyway, Dahlia and Mark arguing here. It's not always simple to contrast what happens on the Supreme Court's docket with the justices' own lives, but an unusually clear double standard is emerging this month. The revelation that billionaires are secretly reeling in conservative justices with lavish gifts has prompted a debate over ethics and recusal rules. Justice Samuel Alito entered the fray last week, preemptively declaring himself to be totally innocent of allegations leveled in a then yet unpublished ProPublica report. Simultaneously, in other words, there was a leak. Why don't we have an investigation of that leak? Simultaneously, the court's end-of-term opinions reveal that certain justices believe they should get every benefit of the doubt, while the most powerless parties before them get none. That seems problematic. In his Wall Street Journal op-ed, Alito defended his refusal to disclose a 2008 trip on the private jet of Paul Singer, the GOP mega donor, as well as his refusal to recuse from a case involving Singer's hedge fund. These actions, the justice asserted, were perfectly legal under the Ethics in Government Act. That law compels justices to disclose gifts of value, with the exception of personal hospitality. It defines this term as hospitality extended for a non-business purpose on property or facilities owned by a person. Another provision further limits the scope of hospitality to food, lodging, or entertainment. That according to 28 U.S. Code 455. Meanwhile, what they're saying here, they're now citing 28 U.S. Code Section 455, meanwhile, as laying the grounds for a Supreme Court justice's recusal, requiring it in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. It also sets forth specific scenarios that compel recusal, including a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party. Okay, Alito read both the recusal and disclosure rules in a light most generous to himself. He didn't need to recuse in Singer's appeal because he didn't know Singer all that well, and didn't realize he was a party to a case that came before the court multiple times. Plus, he complained, it's really hard to do all the vetting and paperwork involved. How dare we demand so much of a mere Supreme Court justice? Alito also wrote that he didn't need to disclose the travel because Singer's private jet counted as a facility that fell into the exception for personal hospitality. Plus, the seat he occupied on Singer's private plane would have otherwise been vacant. That really has nothing to do with anything. It seems that under the common law of private jet travel to Alaska fishing resorts, a corpus of law known only to an elite few, taking a vacant seat isn't a gift. If anything, as Alito described the situation, it's a favor to the U.S. Marshals, who would have been required for security reasons to assist a justice who opted to travel commercial. As ethics experts have noted all this week, these justifications fall apart at the slightest scrutiny. To defend his claim that a private jet is a facility, the justice mangled the Random House definition of the word. As our colleague Rick Hasen pointed out, Alito cited a definition that applies only when the word is preceded by, quote, the word transportation. But even then, it would apply to an airport, not an airplane. He also dug up an archaic definition of facility from an old law dictionary, eliding key context that limited this idiosyncratic usage to railroads at the turn of the 20th century. As for the provision of the law limiting the term hospitality to food, lodging, or entertainment, the justice ignored it. We'll say this for Alito, at least he tried. Justice Clarence Thomas, who also concealed trips on a billionaire's private jet, never bothered to explain why he thought an airplane was a facility. Then again, Thomas never bothered to explain why he didn't sit out a January 6th case in which his own wife had a material interest. Perhaps Thomas believed he can exempt himself from recusal and disclosure requirements the way former President Donald Trump claims to be able to declassify documents just by thinking about it, alone in the night. We would be more forgiving of this slapdash, self-serving pseudo-textualism if these justices applied it to anyone but themselves. But a brutal decision that came down last Thursday reminded us that they do not. In Jones versus Hendricks, Thomas, joined by Alito and other conservatives, ruled that many people who are legally innocent must languish behind bars, in some cases indefinitely, because of a court's mistake. The ruling shut down a crucial remedy known as habeas relief for defendants who were convicted for conduct that a court later found not to be illegal. The petitioners are innocent. It is their sentences that are illegal, and yet Thomas and Alito declared that they must serve out those illegal sentences anyway. Hendricks is a complicated case, but let's see if I can sneak in the primer just before we play our outro music. Congress gave defendants the right to request habeas relief when the usual post-conviction process is inadequate or ineffective to test the legality of their detention. Defendants who are legally innocent because they were convicted for conduct that was later determined not to actually be criminal should fall into this category. That's because a different provision arbitrarily limits their ability to file for relief after a court determines that their conduct wasn't illegal. This limitation appears to have been caused by a congressional oversight, with a little linky here to tell you what that oversight was. According to pretty basic English usage, this isn't hard. When an innocent person can't contest the legality of their illegal sentence, they face a process that is inadequate or ineffective. So habeas relief steps in as a fallback. To get around that, Thomas redefined the words inadequate or ineffective to mean something weirdly specific and unintuitive. The post-conviction process is only inadequate or ineffective, he wrote, if the court that sentenced the defendant has literally ceased to exist or become impossible to access. So, if the courthouse was located in the Panama Canal Zone or destroyed by an earthquake, relief might be inadequate or ineffective, since those courts are no longer standing. Anything short of dissolution or obliteration, however, won't cut it, which means that legally innocent people now have no means of challenging their unjust sentences, unless their court has been annihilated by an act of God or something like it. And God forbid we even speculate on what sort of activity that might engender later on down the road. Okay, time for me to give up the microphone, though, and hand it over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming next.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Hey, it looks like his turn to take up the MAGA House attempting to expunge Trump's impeachment. And he mentions that it's out of a DC Marvel alternative universe timeline. Stay tuned to find out exactly why he thinks so, although I think it should be pretty obvious. Plus, of course, the roundup of all the weird and wild news from around the country and around the world next. And we'll see you Wednesday.